Welcome to the Respectful Divorce Podcast. If you're considering a divorce, it's important to know that you have options for how you divorce. On the Respectful Divorce Podcast, we explore those options and provide advice from divorce professionals. I'm your host, Tim Crouch, and today we're talking with members of the Central Florida Collaborative Divorce Group. Joining us today are Andy Blanchard, who is a mental health professional in Winter Garden, Emma Broming, who is a financial professional in Orlando, and Karen Middlekauff, who is a divorce attorney, a collaborative attorney in Orlando as well. Thank you all for joining us today.
Good to be here.
Good to be here.
Having us.
So let's start, and Karen, let's start with you. For someone who is facing a divorce, what do they need to know about what it's like to go through a traditional divorce in the Orlando area?
When people hear about that process, what that normally entails is one of the two individuals files for divorce. The other person gets served with paperwork, either by a process server or a sheriff. They then have 20 days to file an answer, a formal answer, and potentially a counter petition to that process, to that petition. And then the process sort of gets started through the court system, where you have 45 days to do financial disclosures. Then you're supposed to set a mediation date. If your mediation fails, then you sort of have discovery and motions that start flying, right? So that's when you get requests for production, interrogatories, which are just like legal questions that you have to answer. Subpoenas for bank records, or, depending on what the reasons are for the divorce. It could be, allegations of, issues with one parent's mental health or substance abuse. I mean, it goes on and on and on, right? And the final step to this sort of court-based process, which most cases never get to, but some do, is a trial. And that's where, the witnesses are called, evidence is presented, and the judge makes the decision about parenting arrangements, time sharing, what we used to call custody, legal decision-making authority for children, alimony, child support, who's getting what asset, down to the pots and pans and KitchenAid mixers and dogs, and, who has to pay each other's attorney's fees. And then after the trial, someone is usually very upset, if not both people. And so in that situation, normally appellate attorneys get involved. And it goes on and on and on. That is sort of the catastrophic worst case scenario that I just gave you. But a lot of people begin that process. Sometimes they will solve at mediation. Sometimes they will solve after mediation, but before the trial, the proverbial courthouse step settlement happens. You can spend a whole lot of money and a whole lot of time anywhere from the beginning all the way through the end.
So speaking of time, how long are we talking about potentially that it could take before you're divorced?
In the, catastrophic example that I gave, a couple of years. The other problem with, Florida in particular, the Central Florida area, but really every circuit in the state of Florida, is that there just aren't enough judges. There are thousands of divorce cases right now in Orlando. I think the latest statistic that I saw at the end of 2025 was that our family law judges have somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 cases each at one time. So if you're looking for a hearing, like, just a 30-minute or 1-hour hearing, you're looking 3 months out easily. Trials are, 6 to 9 months out. I tell my clients, if you're starting a case now, you're lucky to have your trial by the end of the year. Appeals add another year to it, probably.
Yeah. So contrast then to the collaborative divorce process and how that process flows and how long that might take.
So the collaborative process is an entirely different model. And it basically just depends on everyone's schedules and how fast they want to go. We say in the collaborative process all the time that we only go as fast as the slowest person. But once we start the collaborative process, I like to start having professionals meetings, like a professionals call between the two lawyers, the mental health and the financial neutral, hopefully in 30 to 45 days. I like ideally to have the first meeting with everyone involved 45 to 60 days. And that means all the financial gathering, or at least most of it, has ideally been done. And the mental health has started meeting with the parties individually, and the professionals have all met before that first meeting, which happens in 45 to 60 days. It depends on how many meetings they need, but I would say that, people can finish their case in, a couple of meetings, and you could be done as fast as you want to be done, as fast as everyone's ready to be done. And then it's just a matter of submitting paperwork to the judge without ever even needing to go to the courthouse. They'll just stamp it over email and your case is done.
So you talked about the other professionals, and Andy Blanchard, the mental health professional or divorce coach, and Emma Broming, the financial professional. Andy, talk about what you do in a collaborative case and what you bring to the table.
Well, obviously, in collaborative cases, just like regular divorces, there's usually a lot of emotional things that go along from going from being married in one cohesive family and moving to not being married and being in two separate, but still hopefully cohesive co-families or co-parenting options. So I help with process. I make sure that the emotions of both of the clients and sometimes of the professionals stay within the bounds that we all kind of operate, and we're respectful towards each other. I keep the process on track, help make sure we're staying on task, help keep the clients and the professionals focused on working towards solutions rather than arguing about things that can't be changed that happened in the past. I usually, if there are minor children, I help the clients come to a very workable parenting plan, which is required in the state of Florida to have. And so the nice thing about that is when we're thinking about ahead, looking forward rather than looking behind. We can be thinking about what's in the best interest of the kids rather than what happened 5 years ago or why we got here. Because whether they like it or not, if they have kids, they're going to be in each other's lives. And the better they can learn to co-parent, at least with some professional guidance and supervision, the better their kids do actually after the divorce as well. So I do a lot of that stuff. And then inevitably there's moments where people get really upset because that happens even in collaborative. And so at those moments, I'm going to use my training as a mental health professional to help work through those issues with them, get them connected to the appropriate resources, and keep the process moving so we can finish, like Karen said, in a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, and one of the things that I've sort of heard about divorce coaches or the mental health professionals in this is that your skill sets are such that you're able to read the room sooner than anybody else and see when something may be getting off track and address it before it gets too far off track.
Well, on my best days, yes. Not everybody has best days all the time. But I think when you have a good professional team helping the clients stay focused on the outcomes of the process of getting them divorced successfully, efficiently, so we're not wasting their resources in professional fees and filing and all that, I think the clients eventually grow to appreciate that. And the more we can kind of head them off emotionally and stay out of those hot button topics, the better we help them achieve the goals that they set out at the beginning of the process.
Yeah, and Emma, as the professional, the financial professional in a case, what do you do and what do you bring to the table?
In many divorce cases, there is emotional content tied up in the financial content. And what people want to know the minute they meet with me is how much money am I going to get and how are we going to get it? And so what we do in the collaborative process as neutral financial professionals is we're not aligned with either client. Our goal is to identify, one, what is important to these clients financially. Two, what we know as professionals in the divorce world is important to assist these clients in achieving their goal of getting divorced. And then three, facilitate discussions that attempt to bridge kind of what we know about divorce finance and also what goals the individuals have for things. And so, different from a mediation, different from litigation, you have one person on a collaborative team collecting all of the financial documents. At any given time, everybody on the team, both clients, both attorneys, everyone has access to the same information. And that's one of the hallmarks of collaborative for me as a financial person is that we're all working on the same playing field. often what you see is one person in a marriage has taken on more of the financial management role, and another person may have handled more of the logistics of keeping the family running. Um, a big part of my role in the collaborative divorce process is bringing the person who hasn't had as much exposure to the finances up to speed. That way, when we get to those team meetings, we're all working from the same information. Both people have an understanding of the financial picture so that they can make informed decisions about what makes sense for them. The worst thing is when you get to a trial and you have people who are like, oh, it's a 401k. And then the other person says, well, what is a 401k? We have all of those discussions in the collaborative process and talk about the various pros and cons of arranging assets and liabilities in a myriad of ways. We also have sensitive discussions around alimony. You know, alimony is the hardest thing to talk about in a divorce. We talk about it out in the open. We talk about it in separate offline meetings, and then we come back together to have global discussions about what can we make work for this family to achieve financial outcome that is acceptable to both of them. And so it really reduces information asymmetry to use a neutral financial person. In litigated cases, you often pay for two, and then they have to sit down all the time and have conversations about why, oh my gosh, my client didn't tell me that, or I didn't have that document. Can you please send that to me? In the collaborative process, we eliminate all of that waste and just kind of operate much more efficiently when it comes to the family finances.
And one of the things that always strikes me about your role is that not only are you solving the today question, but you're also really helping people to understand what their financial life will look like after the divorce is over, and for them to begin to know they're going to be okay.
That's a huge piece of it. And sometimes what we do is we, as financial neutrals, loop in a financial advisor. So if there is somebody who may assist the client in the divorce long term, we establish a connection with somebody. We meet with the client and the financial advisor. We have the client express what their goals are. We remind them if they've forgotten in the intervening time, because it can be a confusing time when you're getting divorced. And then we kind of successfully transition the family off so that they can have as low conflict and as positive a financial existence as possible after their divorce process.
So Karen, as an attorney, two questions. One is, why did you decide to practice family law? And then why collaborative?
So the answer to the first one is not very, very sexy. It was when I graduated law school, it was right after the big crash. And so the jobs were bankruptcy, foreclosure, and divorce, right? And so that's the answer to that one. But I ended up liking it, and I never really shifted out of it. What I did shift out of was litigation. I did my time, so to speak. And what I realized is it took an emotional toll on my clients and on me in a way that I didn't like. Even if my clients won, which was rare, right? You know, I always say you never get everything you want. You always leave unhappy, right? The lead up to it is just misery. It's just abject misery. And it's an expensive, miserable time of uncertainty and angst and having all of your decisions out of your control. And I hated that, right? And for me too, as a lawyer, I hated the fact that it was so out of my control. Like at the end of the day, I have a judge just calling balls and strikes, and it's someone's life, you know, it's their where their children are going to go and how their money is going to go and where all their stuff is going to go. I mean, there's nothing more personal than that someone who literally doesn't know you gets to decide. Like, it was just not something that I wanted to do forever. And so when I heard about collaborative and I started getting into collaborative, I liked myself better as an attorney. I liked the work that I was doing, and I liked the results that I was leaving my clients with better. And I also very much like the ability to work with people instead of against them. So, you know, part of my career, when I did litigation, was there would be an expert, a financial expert that I would be tearing apart while I was working with them as my expert on a different case. It's very weird, right? And then these are people that I like, but I'm attacking the work that they do and making them look bad. That's just an awful thing to have to do to people that are your colleagues. I very much prefer to work with my colleagues instead of against them.
Emma, what brought you to the collaborative process?
So we do quite a bit of litigated divorce, and that was kind of how we got started in the divorce world at my firm. And my business partner actually heard about the collaborative process through a friend of his, and he got trained, and then he said, you know what, I think this is something you're going to really like. And so we have migrated a huge portion of our business over to the collaborative process because it makes sense. It is less expensive overall and more effective. Gets things done faster. I know Karen mentioned earlier that, it can take over a year to get to your trial. I have had cases where we were over 5 years before we got to a trial, and nobody was happy at the end of that. I mean, their child was grown up, life had passed them by while they continued to pay a group of professionals, and neither of them achieved the goals that were really important to them. So that's why I'm such a champion for this process, because if we can avoid that, and we can keep families, moving together, even if they're not, married anymore, it just makes more sense. It also makes more sense to keep the money in the family as opposed to among everybody else. So it's a much more effective, gratifying way to assist people in this difficult transition in their lives.
Yeah. Andy, what about you? How did you end up doing collaborative work?
Well, interestingly enough, my mother was she's retired now, but she was a family law attorney in Houston, Texas. And so she had gotten involved in the collaborative process movement there, which is still struggling pretty hard right now. But one of her mentors is Norma Thrush. And so they went to a conference up in Minneapolis, an IACP conference, where they bumped into a woman named Barbara Kelly who practices in Central Florida. So they got to talking. And so Barbara called me and said, let's go to lunch. And that's how I got plugged in. So it's kind of a random roundabout story, but what really got me interested in staying with it and getting trained was the trail of families coming through my office in the clinical capacity, working with their teenage kids post-divorce, and just the emotional ringer that those kids were still going through, going back and forth between two very dysfunctional co-parents. So many of the conversations, so many of the coaching to the parents, I'm like, this should have been dealt with when you guys did your divorce 10 years ago. And yet your 16-year-old is now in my office, still having issues, still having challenges, mostly because mom and dad can't get along, and they can't sit in the same stands at a football game, and they can't sit in the same area of the piano recital. And so seeing kids that have come out of a collaborative process clinically is like, not always, but night and day different than the ones that come out of really nasty, litigated, prolonged, appealed processes. And so I got interested in it, and yeah, it's very different work than what I do in my office, which is just me and my clients. I get to work with other professionals, which is exciting, but mostly it's about the families end up with much better outcomes that they're much more committed to, and they actually learn how to be decent to each other when it comes to raising their kids together. So, I think those are good wins for their family as well.
So how does the process itself keep the kids out of an emotional ringer that divorce is, no matter what process that you're choosing? What happens in the collaborative process that reduces that?
I think there's a couple of things. One is how we conduct ourselves within the process itself. We have a list of what we called like communication tips. They used to be called like what are agreed, kind of like how we're going to agree to behave. But basically, we are not only we're communicating, we are establishing, and we're keeping respect in the process, start to finish. Everybody gets treated with dignity. Everybody gets treated with respect. If we have disagreements, we handle them civilly and respectfully. And that helps the parents transition emotionally from being married to just having a different kind of relationship with the co-parent. And if, Karen or Emma, if you have other insights on that too, because y'all observe it differently.
There's in the litigation process, I hate to keep, catastrophe. I can never pronounce that word right. Catastrophizing, right? But in the catastrophic scenario where the parents cannot agree on the appropriate parenting plan, the path that you go down to fight that is so bad. So it's, you're asking for the appointment of a guardian ad litem. A guardian ad litem is essentially an investigator, who's appointed to represent the, child's best interests. They're going to talk to the child. They're going to talk to the parents. They're going to talk to the child's therapist. They're going to talk to the kid's teachers. They're going to talk to witnesses who saw dad's outburst at the baseball game, right? We are lying to ourselves if we think that the kids don't know what's going on, all of that. Even if the parents keep their mouths shut, not everybody else does, right? And then you've got social investigations, which are psych testing of the parents, sometimes psych testing of the children, right? You've got doctors involved that the kids are going to. So then you've got, depending on the age of the child, you could end up with motions for child testimony. I've seen that happen. That's horrible. Like, I wouldn't do that when I was a litigator, but other people do. They will, schlep their kid into the courtroom and sit them on the witness stand and make them talk about all the things that dad or mom didn't do, right? And then after the divorce case is over, if the parents still can't get along, then you end up going down the route of parent coordination, potentially. What a parent coordinator is like a forced co-parent therapist where everyone needs to sit on that couch and, talk to each other with a third party, intermediary and help make decisions about the kids, which often include things as little as like, is my kid going to be allowed to play travel soccer next year? Well, the kids know that a decision hasn't been made until mom and dad go meet with this random person that the court appointed. Like, they know. And then if things still aren't going good, then you end up with a petition to modify, right? And there is no way that even the best parents who try to keep their kids out of it can totally isolate their kids from that ugliness.
Each other. They are literally fighting against each other for time with their kids. And so the focus becomes on winning, not on what the kids need. In collaborative, we are able to kind of help them sit on the same side of the table and look at it together and go, what's in the best interest of our kids? Now, they're not always going to agree, but they learn how to be civil about it. They learn how to be respectful about it. They learn how to step back and consider the other person's perspective, hopefully, and they come up with a compromise. And if not, instead of having to go back to the court or go do all that stuff, they can call the neutral facilitator back up after the fact, or they re-engage the whole team and we come in and help. It works really, really well. Go ahead, Em. Nope.
I think there's something to be said for financial stress too, and the effect that has on children. In a litigated divorce, sometimes people just say, you know what, I'm not paying for your bills anymore, or I'm not going to pay your rent, or we all have to live in the same house because we can't come up with a plan for what temporary support might look like and how we're going to function financially as a family. Sometimes that involves kids missing activities, having to change schools because one of the parents won't pay for private school, or you're having to go through your attorney and fight for a hearing to get those things done. And as Karen said, sometimes it can take months to get a hearing. So if the other person is not paying for, your child's life-saving medication, you're not having a discussion about it. You're having a protracted argument on paper that maybe will yield you 30 minutes with a judge who's then going to rubber stamp it and say, yay, but that doesn't really solve the problem for your child, and it doesn't really solve the problem for you. And so in the collaborative process, we deal with every interim issue, both personal child rearing and also the financial issues as they come up. So-and-so has a huge hospital bill. Okay, how are we going to accommodate that? Those are discussions that we have. Even if people disagree about how they should handle finances on a temporary basis, we're talking about it, and the clients have fewer surprises, and it's less pulling the rug out from underneath one another and more, what can we do to make this work so that we can get through this process and then move on?
So we're doing this podcast as part of Divorce with Respect Week, which is coming up March 1st through 8th. And it's an opportunity for people to talk to you all or other participating collaborative professionals for free with a divorce consultation. And Emma, I'll start with you. If someone is going to do a consultation with you to talk about financial issues in their divorce, what can they expect?
We're going to talk about is what is the financial dynamic that your family has operated in? Is one person the earner? Do we have a 2-earner household? Do we have what dynamics are in play? And sometimes that involves talking about your children. How old are your children? What effect does that have on either person's financial capabilities? We talk about the various assets that the family has. What are you aware of? What has the other person mentioned that you may not be aware of? And then we talk about kind of what each person's needs look like, and also what they can expect from either a collaborative divorce or another divorce if that's what the person chooses to do. And so it's kind of a structured conversation, but it's focused on the individual family as opposed to kind of the one size fits all. We'll file this, we'll file this, we'll file this. So that's kind of how we handle things.
Yeah. Andy, if someone's doing a consultation with you during Divorce with Respect Week, what can they expect to learn?
Well, hopefully they'll learn a little bit more about why I like the collaborative process and think it works best for families, kind of what to expect out of putting a parenting plan together. You know, if that's a large concern for families, it's like, okay, what are my options, or how do we do, they used to call it visitation. We call it time sharing. What does that involve? How is this different than a mediation, or how is this different than litigation? I'm not an attorney, so I don't give legal advice, but I can walk them through what the process looks generally and kind of walk through, okay, what are your concerns about it? And let's talk about that so that we can see, is this a good fit for your family? Because sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, but most of the time it is. And if it is, that's great. Let's see if we can overcome some obstacles and help you get more comfortable with the idea of collaborative and the nuts and bolts of it.
All right. And Karen, same question, a consultation with you, what would that look like?
The initial consultation for Divorce with Respect Week, I walk them through the different ways someone gets divorced, right? You know, what are the pros and cons of collaborative versus the other ways? A lot of times people bring up cost. And so I normally talk to people about all the different options for cost. What do they expect to pay in litigation? What do they expect to pay by just going into mediation? What could you expect to pay in collaborative? And then depending on the financial circumstances of the parties, if they earn below a certain amount, I also will talk to them about what we call the one case project in our group, the Central Florida Collaborative Divorce Group, which is there are professionals, a whole bunch of them, that are willing, depending on the financial circumstances of the parties, to do, reduced cost or flat fee or different sort of creative financial arrangements for, a few collaborative meetings or something like that, right? There are times that attorneys will agree to match each other's rate, or the cheaper attorney will agree to, I don't mean to say cheap, but less expensive attorney will agree to do more of the drafting, right? Or, things like that. So if cost is truly a concern, no one wants to pay for a lawyer, right? Sometimes you have to. But if they're below a certain economic threshold, I can also talk to them about ways that you can go through this process, or a process that's not litigation, for, a price tag that would be more reasonably affordable to their family. And then sometimes we get into the high level of what's on the menu in your divorce, right? Like, you can't order off the menu until you know what's on the menu, right? So what does distribution of assets look like? What does alimony look like? What does the law say about the presumption of parenting time with the children? I would hit that in broad brushstrokes. If we're, doing a more formal consultation, we normally get way more into the weeds on those topics.
Karen Middlekauff, Emma Broming, and Andy Blanchard, thank you all for joining us on the Respectful Divorce podcast today. If someone would like to learn more about you or reach out to you, what's the best way to do that? Karen?
So, you could call my office. So my office number is 407-785-6923. You could also email me. It's kmiddlekauff, full last name, 2 Ds, 2 Fs, @losi.law, and you'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah. All right. Andy, best way to get a hold of you?
Probably also email. It's andy@discoveryorlando.org. Our office number is also 407-376-3773.
And Emma?
Mine is email or phone call to the office. Our office is 407-895-6555. And my email is ejbroming@premierquant.com.
All right, we will put all of that information in the show notes, along with a link to the Central Florida Collaborative Divorce website. I want to thank you all for watching the Respectful Divorce podcast today. This reminder that Divorce with Respect Week is coming up March 1st through 8th. You can talk to divorce professionals, including attorneys, financial professionals, divorce coaches for free by simply going to divorcewithrespectweek.com to find a professional near you. Divorce with Respect Week, March 1st through 8th, and that website once again, www.divorcewithrespectweek.com. This is Tim Crouch for the Respectful Divorce Podcast, reminding you that collaborative divorce is a better way to untie the knot.